You know, when I was at school, there were girls' toilets and boys' toilets. Thank heavens. I can't think of anything more horrific than going through puberty, grappling with the onset of menstruation and the firing up of sexuality alongside that strong teenage inclination towards social acceptance, while having to get on with my business next to the boy I had a crush on. It would have been considered wholly inappropriate to make boys and girls share loos, perverse and illegal even. Yet today, some schools in the country now have only unisex facilities to accommodate transitioning pupils, with the consequence that many girls bunk off during their periods or skive off after lunchtime to go home and use their family toilet in privacy. The same is also true in many offices, in restaurants, nightclubs and bars. What was once a port in a storm for many women to have a cry, a gossip, top up our lippy, donate a tampon or fart with impunity, has been ruthlessly snatched away from us, and we're not happy. The potency of the trans lobby has become such that it is now oftentimes trumping gay rights, women's rights and scientific objectivity. Meanwhile, more young people than ever before are questioning whether they have been born into the right sex, creating complex mental health issues and impassioned arguments over agency and age suitability. Something once so simple has now become so convoluted, so complex and so controversial that the debate over gender is all too often a massive wrecking ball through long-established rights and beliefs. How did we get here, and what on earth happens next? Well, let's restart the conversation and speak to Kellie-Jay, a women's rights campaigner and the founder of Standing for Women. Thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're talking very much about the announcement in Scotland, where they're putting forward a bill to relax the Gender Recognition Act, meaning there will be no need to have medical certification diagnosing you with gender dysphoria, and you won't have to prove that you've been living as that gender for 2 years. In fact, all you can say is, I've lived as this gender for 3 months and that is it. Do you think that's appropriate?
No, I actually think we should completely get rid of the Gender Recognition Act. I find it quite preposterous that in our society, in order to be tolerant of other people, we need a legal fiction. And so in my view, we should just get rid of it. And it all comes on the back of the erosion of language, which once you start conflating sex and gender is not even legally defined. So it's quite weird that we would call something a Gender Recognition Act when actually the thing that you change is your sex marker on official documentation. And so what Standing for Women did, which is the organisation that I founded, is we came up with a strategy to talk about women and to talk about the word woman and what was happening with the erosion of our rights. And we felt that the fact that you could say woman and people were unclear of what that actually meant was a talking point. And so when you erode that language, when that language becomes completely unclear, safeguarding goes out the window, your rights go out the window, and ultimately what it really leads to is the profound harm of healthy children's bodies. And so when we look at how this has happened, it's just tiny little incremental changes that supposedly come along with progressive inclusion, diversity, and giving trans rights, which actually in the United Kingdom in 2021, there is no difference between the rights that I have or the rights that men have, except when they are related specifically to our bodies. So Standing for Women did a massive bit of research where we looked at hospitals, we looked at the police, and what we found is 4 hospitals that we asked in England and Wales actually differentiate between females and men that call themselves women. And so what that means is when you go into hospital and you ask for a female member of staff, there's only 4 hospitals in the country that will actually guarantee that you get one. And unfortunately, that's exactly the same for the police. In fact, it's worse. There's not a police force in the country that recognises a difference between somebody that just declares that they're female and someone that is actually female. Now, what that means is when you are arrested and somebody needs to search you, that in England and Wales in 2021, that person can literally be a man and he can intimately search a female suspect. So these rights that are being eroded for, I have no idea what purpose, because it really doesn't suit women. We are just bearing the brunt of all of the erosion of the rights, and that's because of the erosion of language.
Why do you think it is that this doesn't seem to cut both ways? When we talk about trans activism, it does constantly seem to be an imposition on women's rights. But of course, women can equally declare their gender to be male and say, I'm a man, I want to use men's facilities, I want to go into men's changing rooms, I want to access men-only services. Why does it constantly seem to be the other way round when we're having this debate, do you think?
Well, I mean, there's not 12,000 women serving time in our prisons for sexual offences, unlike the number of men. And so I think if a woman chooses to put herself at risk by going into a predominantly male space, male sport, whatever it is, then she's taking her own risks. Whereas when a man comes into a woman's space, it instantly makes it a far less safe space for women. You mentioned girls going to the toilet and skipping school. That's not because girls have suddenly become fearful of what boys will do. It's because they've had a lifetime already. By the time they're teenagers, they know exactly what the risks are to both their privacy and their dignity. We seem to, there's a case recently, We Spa, where a man got into a pool with a woman and her daughter, and he was basically indecent exposure, but because he was trans, Me Too just goes out the window, and it becomes no, not you, when the person involved is trans. And so I think we are acutely aware from a really young age what our bodies mean and what our relationship is in a public space. And I don't think men have that experience. And so I think that's why the risks are entirely different.
How on earth did we end up here? Sometimes I find myself, I was in the European Parliament up until January the 31st, 2019, and I'm pretty sure if this was a massive issue as it is today, it would have been something that I would have been talking about. So that alone gives me my own personal timeline of how quickly, how rapidly this debate is evolving and having real-time effects. What is driving this? And when you consider 50% of the population are women, and the number of the population, the percentage of the population that are trans, how is it that all of a sudden, rather than it becoming sort of a smaller debate and us talking about making sure that people aren't discriminated against, that those who have gender dysphoria have access to services, that if they are certified, they can come and use female spaces. If they are, in body and soul and in heart to them women, then why not? But how come we've now got the Olympics saying, well, this female can compete as a weightlifter? It just seems to me so fast that we can't keep up with it, and it's frightening to a lot of women.
I think a couple of things. I really don't think there is any such thing as a woman who isn't born female. And I don't know what body, heart and soul or living as a woman would actually ever mean. And so just to park that, I think it happened a long time ago when none of us were watching, when this explosion hadn't happened. And so all the structures, all the legal structure to enable this change had already happened, and we didn't really know it was going on. Back as far as 1994 in the government, they were talking about what would happen with the prison population if you put men in women's prisons. And basically people said that would never happen. That's nothing that will ever happen. And here we are in 2021, and we have rapists in female prisons. And in the United States of America, men with HIV impregnating women in the prisons, or rather men with HIV in the prisons and impregnating women in those prisons. And the women aren't even allowed to be told that men are coming in to those prisons. But we have lots of little bits of structure and infrastructure where men who want to pursue their lives as so-called women, and they are in positions of power, and what happens is they end up controlling the situation or being in the room. I don't know if you've ever been in a room, but if where this is happening, but if you have a committee of women and one of those and that committee gets disrupted by a man who is serving his own rights and trying to push himself forward in order to be accepted as a woman, you can no longer talk about that particular issue. And so, for example, the CEO of Rape Crisis Edinburgh is male, and he recently said that women who are victims of rape, who were also bigoted, they could be re-educated as part of their trauma to examine their prejudice. So that's how it happens. It's death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, it's very alarming, and it's cuts that for lots of women out there we all feel very personally. Kellie-Jay, thank you so much for coming on and raising those issues with us.
Thank you.
That's Kellie-Jay, also known as Posie Parker, women's rights campaigner and founder of Standing for Women. Well, thank the Lord somebody is. Peter Tatchell also joins me. He's a very well-known human rights